Good to be with you here on Drive. Now, let us say welcome now to Simon Hart, the Secretary of State for Wales in the Cabinet. Simon, good evening to you.
Hello, hi.
Good to have you with us, Simon. Can you start just by clearing something up for me here? Earlier on, you probably heard your Cabinet colleague, Grant Shapps, saying the idea of calling on the government to get involved directly in this rail dispute was a stunt. That is what he said. You'll have heard that. Now, it is a fact, Simon, isn't it, that since the pandemic, the government wrote into contracts with rail operators that the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, has the authority and must sign off personally in writing deals that are used to end industrial disputes. That is correct, isn't it? Simple fact.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, don't dispute that.
No, in which case that your government then bears direct responsibility in this dispute. It's not a remote responsibility, it's a direct one. You have a say and the ultimate say in all of this. So you do have a responsibility here. Surely, what about the argument you should be exercising that to bring about some sort of settlement?
I think the clue is in the word ultimate that you used. I think that this is a dispute between employers and employees. Yes, you're quite right. The government has an ultimate say. It does in a number of things, but we think and I think that Grant Shapps is absolutely right, that we must give the proper process a chance to succeed. The use of the government, if you like, stepping in to wield a big stick is something which I think most people would like to see as a last resort. We never have wanted to interfere with every dispute might occur between a trade union and employer.
Yeah.
These are normally best resolved by those who are closest to the problem. We reserve the right, as Grant said, we reserve the right and the legal right to step in if absolutely necessary.
But is it not then, Simon, absolutely necessary now? Millions of people are having their lives and their careers and their daily work disrupted in a way which is going to hurt an awful lot of people. Isn't that sufficiently urgent to justify ministers of the Crown getting involved?
In many respects, I can understand why you would make that argument, but it's not helped. Our situation is not helped by the fact that Mick Lynch, the head of the union, is openly boasting about wanting to revert to the 1970s and refusing to talk to the government. So it doesn't fill me with very hope that would necessarily be the easy way, the simple solution that it might be suggested is if he is trying to sort of almost boast about the fact that he, as I say, wants to return to some bygone age and play politics with it. That's not a good. I don't feel particularly optimistic about a satisfactory outcome if the union boss is making those kind of threats.
Right. Look. Let's speak then for the government, of which you're a senior member. Are you ready, as Grant Shapps says? Are you ready to see these strikes continue for months, maybe many months, into the future, Simon?
No, Grant. I think Grant Shapps was right. I didn't hear all of his interviews this morning. He's absolutely right. Clearly, it is in everybody's interest to bring this dispute to the earliest and most satisfactory conclusion that we can. But most importantly, it is also in the union interest, the RMT's interest to do that.
Yeah.
With every that it persists with this action, it is damaging itself in its own reputation and it's the prospects for its own members, as well as damaging the economy and damaging prospects of people whose jobs depend on public travel and whose health and education depends on public travel. So this has to be a joint effort. It has to be joint. It makes no sense, and I don't think there is any public sympathy, or not much public sympathy, for this kind of action when there is it is possible and there should be an enthusiastic desire to enter into a negotiated settlement. It just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not going to try and quantify the opinion on either side of the question, but just earlier on, our colleagues have been out and about and hearing that there is some sympathy. I'm not going to say more sympathy than less sympathy, but there is some sympathy for the striking rail workers, if only because everyone can feel the effects of the cost of living crisis. At the moment, I'm not really seeking to present you with arguments. I'm simply exploring the facts as they've been presented by your colleagues. And so with Grant Shapps telling us that he's willing, if necessary, to see these strikes go on for months. Obviously, he doesn't want to see it go on for many, many months, but willing to see that. Are you also willing then to face down, Simon, teachers and health workers and civil servants, barristers, I don't know, traffic wardens, all at once, and if necessary, indefinitely? Are you prepared to contemplate that idea? That is a factual question, not an argument.
There's a degree of sort of a hypothetical nature about that.
Really?
everybody. This is not. We want to try and make sure that we navigate the really difficult challenges around cost of living as empathetically as we possibly can.
Yeah.
If, let's say, the RMT, in a sense, got its way with all of this, actually, all we're really probably going to see is a massive contribution to an inflationary spiral, which is going to put it's going to put jobs at risk across the whole of the public sector as well as the private sector. So, of course, if we ended up in a position where everybody demanded a pay increase and we succumbed to that, and all we effectively did in succumbing to that is make life more difficult for more people, we would definitely be doing our job.
Yes. I mean, you're taking a political gamble here, aren't you? You could be, and likely will be, on the wrong side of the argument from the point of view of those workers who could very easily run into millions in schools, hospitals, clinics, in government departments, in the law courts, all over our country. You're taking a political gamble with this position, very consciously.
I hope it's not a political gamble. I hope it's pragmatic and responsible economics. The biggest threat facing families and workers across the UK is from uncontrolled inflation. It's difficult enough as it is already at 9%.
Yes.
And if we were to, for arguably populist reasons, allow that to spiral into the double digits, then all of the interventions that we've been able to make would be rendered worthless, and more people's livelihoods would be at risk as a result. That's something. And by the way, if anybody wanted an indication of whether we are, if you like, committed to the rail network, don't forget that during the pandemic, we did put £16 billion into the rail network. That's equivalent of 600 quid per household, because we wanted to make sure those jobs and those services were protected.
Yes.
And strangely, Mick Lynch was remarkably quiet about that at the time. So our commitment to making sure that people do have a livelihood, either in this sector or indeed any other public sector, is absolute and demonstrable by what we were putting in during the pandemic. So I don't want anybody to think this is a sort of them and us situation. It might be as far as us and Mick Lynch is concerned, but the travelling public and people whose livelihood depends on this, absolutely not. We are full square behind members of the public who want a fair outcome. Of course they do, but they also want to be able to keep the economy going, keep inflation under control, and still have a job this time next year.
Let me just give you a bit of breaking news just in the last moment while we're speaking. The RMT have said now they are ready to re-enter talks with Network Rail and train operators tomorrow. Mick Lynch talking about the terrific turnout at picket lines today, so there'll be more talks tomorrow. And I recognise, Simon, the imperative of doing whatever can be done to try to face down the threat of inflation. But I wonder, it does seem curious, doesn't it? Does it seem curious to you that only so few months ago the Prime Minister was standing in front of the country and saying what we need most of all right now was a high wage economy, that what we needed was an economy where people were being paid what they're worth, where they were able to get what they could persuade their employers to give them. And now look.
Well, don't forget that rail workers on average receive about £44,000. The national average wage, as you know, is about £26,000. A significant number of rail workers, or particularly in the case of train drivers, earn significantly above £60,000.
Yeah, many earn much less than that, as you know perfectly well.
We are fully. I don't think that alters the PM's expression of desire for this at all. So we are dealing with something. Not all, by the way. I'm not trying to make out that everybody in the rail network is paid those sums, but there are a significant number who are, and we want to try and make sure that as many jobs are protected as possible. But by the way, in relation to the breaking news, great stuff, really good. That is how this will be resolved. And if after today and yesterday and some of perhaps the public reaction to the union, maybe that the reality of that might have registered with Mick Lynch, and that he's getting round the table is precisely where we should be, and exactly why I said at the beginning that the government stepping in at this stage might not necessarily provide the magic answer we're looking for. What we need to do is employees and employees to thrash this out. We've been here before, back in the 70s. Thankfully, not too often in recent years. But let's resolve this.
Right. A word on the politics of all of this. So you'll know the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, is telling front benchers in his party not to appear on picket lines. In the light of that, you can't really call these labour strikes, can you, or can you?
Well, I think, I've always thought with Keir Starmer that he's always slightly attempting to be a Blairite and a Corbynite simultaneously. And I think he has to decide which it is he wants to be if he's going to be a successful leader of that party. And the fact is, there's plenty of Labour politicians out today, either refusing to condemn the strikes or indeed actually playing an active part on a picket line or making their presence felt.
We're drawing very clear lines here. When you point out, as you do and your colleagues do often now, that Labour is not condemning the strikes as a matter of policy, does that make them, in a word, unpatriotic, Simon, do you think?
I think what it means is if we're trying to bring this thing to a conclusion, and if we're trying to indicate that we want to protect jobs, we want to keep the economy under within an inflation within reasonable limits, and we want to, above all, protect the interests of the travelling public, then I think it is beholden on the opposition, just as it on the government, to make sure that we do that.
Are those who sympathise with the strikers, these and future strikers, are they also unpatriotic, in a word?
I think the best thing, I'll tell you what would be the best way of bringing this strike to a conclusion, is if all the major political parties joined in a mutual position.
Okay, a mutual position of agreement. Not going to see that anytime very soon. Good to talk to you, Simon Hart, the other Secretary of State for Wales. News is coming up. Leader Keir Starmer wants to be seen not to be endorsing these strikes that have kicked off today. He's told shadow ministers in his team to keep away from the striking railway workers' picket lines. Now let's talk to Charlotte Nichols, who's a Labour Member of Parliament for Warrington North. Charlotte, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, John.
So Charlotte, you're about to join the picket line, and with your mum.
Yeah, my mum, like RMT members across the country, is not someone who is wanting to go on strike, but she feels that she's been left no choice. Now, we've got to remember that within this dispute, I think it was a 71% turnout with 89% of RMT members voting in favour of industrial action. There's not a single MP in Parliament who has a mandate like that. And I think that we have to listen to the rail workers and the really deep struggles that they're facing at the moment, particularly people who are working in roles like catering, cleaning, gate line staff, ticket assistants, people that aren't on anything like the kind of salaries that have been floated about during this debate and who are really at the sharp end of the government's cost of living crisis. They're not on strike because they want to be. As I said, they feel like they've got no choice. Yeah,
but so look, your leader, Keir Starmer, Charlotte, he clearly does not want to hand ammunition to government ministers and the opponents of your party who are calling these strikes Labour strikes. Do you not sympathise with that?
Well, I think it's very clear that the Tories are the ones who are at fault here. The Secretary of State for Transport hasn't even given the Rail Delivery Group a negotiating mandate for them to be able to make a pay offer to RMT members, people who work on the railway, who are struggling with a cost of living crisis. He could have intervened at any point. He could have given them a negotiated mandate. He could have spoken to the Treasury, got around the table with RMT and with the employers to mediate that dispute and resolve it in an amicable, fair way that could have averted this strike action. Now, frankly, the government are always going to try to deflect the blame on everyone else. It's what they do. They take the credit for everything and the blame for nothing. But I don't think that Labour should play their game on that front. We should be unequivocal in standing up for railway workers who are key workers who helped get the country through the pandemic and who are having a really difficult time at the moment.
Well, I am going to be talking to a member of the cabinet a bit later on this programme, Charlotte. It's Simon Hart, the Welsh Secretary. But your position, your party's position, you say that you should be standing shoulder to shoulder with these striking workers. Does that mean you think Keir Starmer should be with you on that picket line or another picket line somewhere else?
I think it's for every individual MP to make the decision for themselves. I think every MP from every party should be going to visit their local picket line, should be speaking to the workers that are affected, should be listening to what they've got to say, and should be doing what they can to put pressure on the government and on the rail operating companies to bring an end to this dispute by putting a fair deal on the table that helps railway workers to be able to continue doing the jobs that they do, to be able to get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. I think that's really simple and straightforward.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's being argued by some in the trade union movement, people like the leader of the Unite Union, for example, that Labour was founded by, well, among others, trade unionists, and that's clearly true. But today the Labour Party is there to represent every part of society, isn't it? Including the workers and the professionals who want and they need to get to and from work today, and they're being prevented from doing that. Your party needs to represent them and their interests too, doesn't it?
Of course, and clearly the Labour Party is here to stand up for everyone in our society, but we are founded as the party of Labour. The trade unions are the organised part of the working class. I think that they have the established link not only to our party, but to many of us as individual MPs. My parents met at TUC conference on quite a literal level. I wouldn't even be here without the trade union movement. Right. But I think that when we look at some of the other workers that are going to be impacted, the very fact that the country is sort of ground to a standstill today because of these strikes shows just how important those transport workers are. And clearly they should be paid and rewarded fairly for doing that. And I think when other people may be taking industrial action themselves, and we're seeing key workers right across the piece, from teachers, nurses, other staff in the transport sector, all looking at, the potential for having to take industrial action to stand up for their terms and conditions and their rights, they should know that Labour will be shoulder to shoulder with them too. We don't get better paying conditions for any group of workers by kind of pitting one against the other. So
tell me, look, in the world of politics, which I'm sure you understand very well indeed, if your leader and shadow ministers in the Labour Party were to follow your example and take your advice and stand shoulder to shoulder with striking workers on the picket line, do you reckon, Charlotte, that would make a Labour government at the next election less or more likely?
I think it would be more likely, because ultimately it's showing our Labour values, it's showing who we are and what we're about, and it's standing up for ordinary working people who are facing the brunt of the government's cost of living crisis. And I think when we look at some of the polling that's been done today, actually it shows that a majority of working age people are in support of the strikes because they know that they're having a really difficult time as well, and that people on the railway not getting the kind of reward that they deserve for doing their jobs isn't going to make anyone else better off.
Well, Keir Starmer's calculation is that you would put off a lot of key voters, swing voters who are not already firmly aligned with the red or the blue rosette as things stand. Now, look, should trade unions then continue to affiliate and fund the Labour Party, even though the leadership of the party will not join those picket lines and endorse these strikes?
Well, the RMT isn't affiliated to the Labour Party. That's an important.
But other unions will be taking action. Other unions will be taking action. It's pretty certain, and the question will arise more directly. So, what's your view on that question?
I don't think it is certain because, as I said, it's a decision for their members. RMT members with an overwhelming mandate decided to take industrial action. Now, we have got a number of sectors where we may see that being done.
Teachers, health workers. I could give you a long list and you know who they are.
But each individual dispute needs to be looked at on its individual merits. And as I said, if the workforce wants to take industrial action, feels like that's something that's necessary as a last resort to defend their pay and their conditions, I don't think it's controversial to say that Labour MPs should be standing with them shoulder to shoulder to achieve that, because we only achieve a high wage economy where it pays to go to work, where people can expect when they're in the workplace to get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work and to be able to retire in dignity. That requires trade unions working together with employers to deliver fair pay and fair health and safety at work for their workforce.
All right, Charlotte, I'll leave it there. I'm going to be talking a bit later on to Jenny Chapman, who's a member of Keir Starmer's front bench team. But Charlotte Nichols, Labour MP, I'll leave you to join your mum on that RMT picket line.